So today we are going to talk about the Constitution. In the case of Nigeria, we started out with a colonial constitution based on our then relationship with British colonial rule. And then we transitioned into military constitutions, which were presided over by military decrees. And even though we now say that we have a democratic constitution, which was bequeathed at the beginning of this Fourth Republic, it is actually, in a manner of speaking, still a military constitution, because the supervision of that Constituent Assembly was done by the last military administration, which birthed the democracy we are now in. Many people use this as an argument to claim that this constitution as it is not working for that reason, and therefore we need something called a people's constitution. I tend to agree. Where I disagree is the reason or the excuse for wanting to change our constitution. When I listen to conversations on television, in the newspapers, typically from a certain generation of Nigerians, what I tend to hear is that the thing that is wrong with the constitution is largely an ethnic conversation. Different ethnic groups in Nigeria jostling for the center and therefore feeling that the constitution as is does not represent any of them very well. And to that generation in their conversation, this is a very valid, solid argument. But to me, who is standing somewhere between the older generation and the current generation of Gen Z and others, I tend to disagree that the thing that is wrong is the ethnic balance in the constitution. But if I may continue their argument, they talk about something called pluralism, by which they mean that Nigeria is a country made up of many different parts, a country of great diversity. And in order for representation to be properly done, we have to change this constitution, because this constitution tends to be unitary, meaning power is consolidated in the center, and any government in center, and by extension, the ethnic group that is favored by that government tends to have dominance over the others. This is a valid point. Historically, Nigeria has always functioned in an ethnocentric way, and presidencies in particular have always tended to favor particular ethnic groups throughout history. So yeah, they are not wrong. But this is why you also need to bridge generations when we have conversations about politics and the Constitution, because the opinions of different generations tend to reflect differently in the way that we analyze these political problems. I think that what is more important to Nigeria, especially where we are today, beyond the conversation about ethnic representation, which is important, is a financial conversation. Nobody would disagree with me if I said that Nigeria's greatest problem in 2024 is the economy. Now, the economy presents itself to us in many different ways. It presents itself to us as what some people call our present greatest threat, which is insecurity. Why is Nigeria having so many problems with insurgencies and rebels and Boko Haram and kidnapping and bandits and all of those? What are the reasons? Now, if you cut through all the noise, what you'll get at the bottom is that Nigeria is a poorly constituted, poorly developed state that doesn't cater to its citizens, and that all of those essential poverties have resulted in all kind of mass resistances, including some very illegal ones, including the crime and all of that. Poverty is the root of crime. That is a socio-economic argument that cannot be disputed. If Nigeria was better constituted and the economy was working for everybody across all classes, from the high socio-economic classes to the low ones, there'd be much less crime, much less open, petty crime and all this kidnapping and banditry. So your top economic problem, insecurity, is an economic argument. So I'm saying, for me, in my view, as someone who is transitioning between the oldest generation and the present generation of Gen Z and others, I'm saying that for me, the key problem in our constitution is not about ethnic representation. It's about the way that the constitution as is enables the kind of economy Nigeria has today. What is wrong with the economy in Nigeria today? It is that the economy in Nigeria today is focused on a kind of revenue allocation model. Notice the words revenue, allocation. Allocation is a fact of life that we take for granted in Nigeria as a major means of distributing wealth. But it's actually very faulty. It's probably colonial too. We'll get to that probably sometime else. What does allocation mean? In our experience as Nigerians, it means that Nigeria's major source of revenue is oil from the Niger Delta. And the federal government controls that derivation of revenue from oil, from crude oil sales, crude oil exportation from Nigeria's Delta region. And that the federal government takes all the billions of dollars it generates every month from crude oil and distributes it. So it sends it down to the state governments. And the state governments take that money which they receive from the federal government and they manage it on behalf of themselves, all 36 states, and also now manage it on behalf of the local governments under each state. That is how Nigeria has existed from beginning till now. And we can all agree it's not working. How do you fix that? Do you fix that by making sure that more ethnic groups have access to the same problem? Or do you just eradicate that financial model so that wherever the ethnic groups are, they can thrive? Because I promise you, if we increase distribution more equally among all ethnic groups and yet keep this old style method of distributing money, each local government and state government will reproduce that federal problem at their own levels. We'll get to that in a moment. So what am I saying? I'm saying that what our constitution really needs is not so much a reform as a rethink. I suspect that the older generation, because of their experiences, which are different from mine, and which are different from those of the new young people, I suspect that they don't see as clearly as those of us in front now where that problem has evolved to. I suspect that they're still stuck on a record that keeps playing that the problem of Nigeria is ethnic, and it is. I'm not denying that. Even the young generation are very, very ethnically minded. Look at all the brouhaha we have had since 2023. All kind of new ethnic movements and new ethnic sentiments. I do not disagree, but I'm saying that we can now see more clearly that underpinning all that ethnic display is a financial problem. Nigeria is poor, and Nigeria is poorly managed. Of course, the poverty of Nigeria is not because there are no resources, because they are not being used well. We'll come to that in a moment. I'm saying that the fundamental change that Nigeria needs to make in its constitution is to stop having a constitution that enables that our only or major source of wealth is allocation. I hope I'm putting it in the right words. Instead, we need a constitution that enables Nigerians at every level and in every ethnic group to create wealth. We have never done that in our over 60-year history. Never. Nigeria has never created wealth. Well, okay, more broadly, nowadays, especially since our economy was, what's the word they use? The economy was rebased. That was about 2014. Since the economy was rebased, we have started considering that there are so-called non-oil economic sectors, but they're not being given the level of attention that can make them replace oil as our major revenue earner. We have to talk about that. And the beginning of that conversation, which I consider to be the most important conversation in Nigeria today, is inside the Constitution. We have to dislodge. We have to deconstruct the way that the Constitution makes Nigeria to rely on revenue allocation, and change to a constitution that makes Nigeria rely on revenue generation, wealth creation. What do I mean? Every state in Nigeria has hundreds of billions of dollars, every single state, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of resources, natural resources that are in the ground and others above the ground. Not to mention Nigeria's human resources, over 200 million people who are very active and who are known as some of the most entrepreneurial people on the surface of the earth. In an alternative scenario, every Nigerian state, all 36, and the local governments within them are enabled by law to be autonomous in terms of wealth creation and wealth generation. They have to use their own revenue to create their own wealth, and the wealth that they create in each state comes back to them as their own. They don't need to share with anybody. Yeah? So that should be our fundamental approach to wealth creation in Nigeria. And the Constitution is the only document that can enable that to happen. For now, until then, nobody is motivated. No politician is motivated to create wealth in their states. They may pay lip service to the idea, but they're not going to do it because they don't have to. There's this kind of free fall, free lunch, freebie, like a baby's feeding bottle thing that politicians know will always be there. That must change first. And until we change that, we're going to keep going around in circles. So in this alternative scenario, I'm going to explain to you why the alternative scenario of wealth creation beats our present revenue allocation model by far. One of the problems that is created by our revenue allocation method of wealth distribution is that it attracts the wrong quality of people as politicians. Let's stick to governors as the prime example of what a Nigerian politician looks like. Governors are very powerful people in Nigeria. A Nigerian governor is more powerful than many presidents in many other countries around the world. They are really powerful people, neck to neck with the president. I'm saying that our constitution as is attracts fairly mediocre types of politicians. Now, this is a broad generalization. I'll break it down later. But our constitution as is, because of this revenue allocation type of free money, attracts fairly mediocre types of politicians into office. Because there is no real intellectual demand for that job. The demand for this job is purely political. It's purely ability to share money amongst those who look up to you. And if you look at it, that's all. That's basically all that our politicians do, especially our governors. They need to make sure that the money is shared. Imagine an alternative scenario where there's no longer free money being shared, but the constitution demands governors who take this job to create wealth, to marshal the resources in their states to become regional global economies that can compete with countries. Then every state in Nigeria would need someone who can outthink the present class of politicians. There's no longer any free money. You're not getting anything. You either make it or you sink. Automatically, we are changing the job description for becoming a governor in Nigeria. Automatically, we are changing the class of people that tend to apply for the job. That's where we need to go next. Now, let me tell you attempt to explain why our present constitution model of revenue allocation makes the work of a governor difficult. Even if you are not mediocre, and I don't think all our governors are mediocre, although in the main they tend to not appear to be competent. I'm sure there are quite a few governors who are doing their very best, but I'm going to explain to you why, no matter how good the governor is individually, the system in which they are working, by which I mean the constitution, really cripples them. They can't do much. Why? You see, every month when the governor receives this federal allocation, the part of that federal allocation that is available for them to do development work, what you and I want, you want to have water and good roads, the part of the money they receive that's available for that development work is very small. Let me explain a bit further. If you look at any budget in Nigeria, whether the budget of a state or of a sector or of a parastatal, any budget in Nigeria, at least 80%, between 80 to 90% of all Nigerian budgets is used to pay salaries. We call this aspect of the budget, this dominant aspect of the budget, we call it recurrent expenditure. Recurrent means money that comes and goes. Every governor, when they receive their monthly allocation, 80 to 90% of it is going to be paid out as salaries, and they're left with roughly, let's say 10-15%. So we would hope that they can actually spend this 10 to 15% on development, the things that matter to you and me. But guess what? We also have in Nigeria a very weak fiscal tradition. Our budgets are loose, accountability is poor, there's a lot of waste, there's a lot of corruption, embezzlement, and all of those things that we are familiar with. Which means that even in the 10 to 15% that is left for them to try and do development work, they may never get up to half of it to use. That comes to them after everybody has taken their cut. So I'm telling you that the Nigerian governor, the average Nigerian governor is stuck with somewhere between about 5 to 7% of the entire money in hand to spend on development. Can you see why nothing will ever happen? You want schools, you want roads and bridges, you want internets, you want foods, you want agriculture, you want so many things, you want good health services, you want human development. With that 5%, it's not coming. So I'm telling you that the constitution as it is today makes Nigerians poor and makes governors useless. Even if a governor was strong and determined and very smart and really wanted to do the right thing, this constitution is very limiting. So number one, I said it attracts the wrong class of politicians as governors. Number two, I said even if a good person becomes a governor in Nigeria, with this constitution, they cannot get very far because they are left with about 5% every month of the total allocation to use for development. How much can you do? The demand for development in Nigeria runs into the hundreds of billions of dollars per state, not to mention the total entity in trillions of dollars. What are we going to do with 5% of a monthly allocation? So you can see clearly with me now that we need to create a new constitution. And I said it's not a constitutional reform so much as it is a constitutional rethink. The very concept of constitution needs to go, and that's the challenge I have with the older generation. Because I think that I said earlier that when they talk about constitution, they are mostly referring to ideas about representation and ethnic pluralism. That's their own thinking. And I'm saying my own thinking, which should be our thinking. It's not about the ethnic representation in it. Those other things are outcomes of something else. It's about how we share or distribute national wealth. It's about finances. And the financial argument is the strongest argument for constitutional change. And I said, more than a reform, it's a rethink. The very idea of what's a constitution, I'm telling you now that a constitution is not so much a legal or ethnic document as it's a financial document. Can we see that? I personally have always had a challenge with the Nigerian use of words like budget. I think that the definition of budget in Nigeria is different from the one in the dictionary. It's different from the one in the dictionary because the dictionary definition of budget is a planning document. But in Nigeria, budget means a salary document. Didn't I just tell you a moment ago that when a governor receives an allocation every month, he spends the bulk of it, more than 80% of it, to pay salaries. The average Nigerian policymaker or civil servant, when they hear budget, they're thinking of salaries. It's wrong. We have to revert to the original dictionary meaning of the word budget. Budget means planning. Primarily planning. We cannot plan with 5%. Nobody can do that. No miracle worker, no matter how intense you are, cannot make a miracle out of 5%. So that constitution needs to change for that reason. Not because it doesn't allow ethnic groups to have the right representation in the legislature and all that, no, but because it makes Nigeria poor. This is the biggest argument for constitutional change in the history of this country, and this should be our main conversation moving forward. And I'd like to see more of this when I see the talking heads and the talking points in the news. I'd like to hear them talk about finances, how to make Nigeria rich and not poor. As of today, Nigeria is the most multidimensionally poor country on the face of the earth. It's a very, very, very stupid reality. We are potentially the world's richest nation, apart from a few competitors like Congo, which is also poor. So maybe at the end of the day, this is an African argument. But let's talk about Nigeria right now, because we're in Nigeria and we know about Nigeria. We all know we should not be poor. But statistically, we are the world's most multidimensionally poor country. It should be an urgency to fix the constitution for financial reasons. Let me show you one more reason why we should fix it. I'm going to look in a new research that has been published in the last week about the population of the African continent. And the report says that Africa is the world's youngest region by far. Half of the continent's population of 1.5 billion people are younger than 19 years old. This is a very unique feature. You'll find it in no other continent on Earth. Africa has the world's most actively growing net positive growth occurs on no other continent in the world apart from Africa. As a matter of fact, they're saying here that Africa's median age is half that of US and Europe. That is, no matter how they try, they can never be as young as Africa. Looked at another way, Africa's under 19 population is roughly equal to the entire populations of the European Union and the United States combined. Africa is young. I'll show you a few graphics to embellish the idea. It matters because Africa has a huge entrepreneurial talent that needs to be exploited, and these people are going to be demanding for jobs. Now, I know, and I don't know if they're telling you this in your schools, but governments cannot create jobs. I know we hear all the time, government cannot create jobs. But this huge population is going to demand for more and more jobs in the next 20, 30 years, in the next 5, 10 years. Government should start getting ready for that challenge, because if you don't fix it, we're going to get the kind of uprisings and protests that are happening right now across the continent, from Kenya to Nigeria and beyond. It's going to get worse. So for now, our governments and politicians rely on foreign investment, as they call it, or aid to attract the resources that we need, which we cannot generate from this very lame constitution I've just finished describing. And even that is not working. We are now in a debt trap where many countries, including Nigeria, spend over 90%, some close to 100%, some over 100% of their revenue paying off debts. That thing is called a debt trap. That's all we get when the foreign investors and the multilateral organizations like the World Bank and the IMF give you their loans. They set conditions that don't favor the country itself, but favor multinational corporations back in the US and America, and keep us poor in a debt cycle. And the younger generation is beginning to complain. This population I just mentioned, that's what they were saying in Kenya when they said something about finance bill. Because it was a World Bank sponsored bill, IMF sponsored bill, and they were tired of the relationship between their president and all these foreign investors and foreign powers. Same thing's going on in our country, Nigeria. So a lot of factors are coming together to show that Africa is at that tipping point, and we need sharp thinking, fast thinking politicians who want to do things differently. According to this survey, unemployment is the top priority that African youth say that their governments should address, and 3/4 of Africans live in countries that are at risk of debt distress. I'm going to close this for a moment and come back to us. I think I've made my point. And I'm going to say one more thing that needs to be said. The youth in this survey said that Africa's biggest challenges are unemployment, and the second is debt. I would say the third, some would say the first, is corruption. And one of the things about corruption is that the link between corruption and this conversation is that our constitution as is now, this revenue allocation dependent constitution, is actually one of the biggest enablers of corruption. Why? One, it encourages a mentality of free basing, free loading, collecting money that you haven't earned. It creates a sense of entitlement, a culture of entitlement. And Nigerians sometimes are some of the most entitled people on earth. Look at it in every scenario. They just feel, it's going to come somehow, by faith or by whatever, it's going to come. It all comes down to the way that we have been raised to see money as something that you can get without creating it. Creates corruption. Not to mention all the loose fiscal institutions and systems that should protect against fraud and corruption that are not working. We need to, if we look at that alternative scenario, if we had an alternative scenario where states created their own wealth responsibly, then we the people and our leaders would have more responsibility to the wealth that we are working hard to create, and will be less open to allow people to mismanage it. And let me tell you one more thing. You see that problem I explained earlier, where I said that 80 to 90% of any budget will be spent on salaries. Do you know that we can change that and we can create an alternative type of budgeting through our constitution where we can release the bulk of the budget for development? Let me show you how. And I think I'll try and close here. I'm just trying to create scenarios for you to say that our biggest challenge is finances and the constitution is the solver of that challenge. Now, so this is the alternative scenario I want to create. If states are mandated by the constitution to generate wealth and to stop collecting allocations, you know what will happen? States could create a revenue stream that is dedicated directly to salaries and a different revenue stream that is dedicated directly to development. And the development stream will be much larger than the salary stream. Let me explain how that works. So they don't mix, and there's no challenge for a governor to say, oh, I want to take 80 to 90% of my money to pay salaries, because there'll be two separate streams. Let me tell you what those streams are. That first stream that goes to salaries and other overheads is a recurrent stream that comes and goes, and its name is taxes. And I'll tell you why taxes are good. You get the people to contribute taxes, and there's a lot of business. There's hundreds of billions of dollars worth of taxable income going in and out of this Nigerian economy. And in another chapter, we'll discuss the so-called illicit outflow of wealth from Nigeria. It can pay off all our debts and all of this foreign investment we're talking about. So I'm saying that there's something called taxes. And if each state would generate those taxes and have a wide enough, efficiently managed tax net, that tax base will be sufficient as a revolving fund, a recurrent source of income to pay off salaries every month. It will even be invested in all kinds of capital instruments and stocks and things to continue to grow it and make sure that salaries are rolling in and rolling out for all those that are employed by the public service. That's a different revenue stream that has nothing to do with this other revenue stream I'm going to describe, which goes directly to development. Now, in this other revenue stream, which has nothing to do, so salaries are settled. We're not splitting our budget into 80% anymore. Salaries are settled by these taxes. Here's a separate revenue stream that every state and local government should be responsible for. It's called revenue generation or wealth creation from your own resources, whether those be resources under the ground, such as minerals, of which we have them in the millions, or resources above the ground in terms of agriculture, of which Nigeria has Africa's largest arable land, this country, Nigeria. Whichever way you look at it, or the human resources, Nigeria is one of the most creative, most entrepreneurial countries on earth. We have no business being poor. If each state would tap into revenue generation through wealth creation of its own from any of those sources, we're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars per state. I keep saying dollars. I hope I can one day speak in terms of African currencies. That's a very huge point there. So if each state will do that generation of wealth, it has already settled salaries, as I've explained earlier. All of this, 100% of this revenue stream, not 5% as we said before, but 100% of it will go directly to development. Give Nigeria 5 years and we'll be on the moon, and other countries will be following after us. If you follow what I just said now. The only way to enable this type of constitution that clearly starts from scratch to create wealth and solve the problem of breaking down your budget into recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure and all of that. That's so old school. We can do much better. The fastest way to get to that destination is to alter this constitution from the roots up. You know, a lot of people when they speak, including President Obasanjo, I think it was last week, he said something about Nigeria needs a hard reset. A lot of people criticize him for this and that and the other, but I think he knows what he's talking about. There is no future for Nigeria beyond a hard constitutional reset. We can dabble around it for as long as we want, we can play around it, we can give excuses, but I'm saying that a hard reset of many things, many institutions and systems and values in Nigeria is the only way forward. But more fundamentally, and which is the goal of the conversation I'm having with you today, our constitution needs to change. Not for the common reasons that are commonly tabled in the conversations you have been hearing, but for financial reasons. The Constitution is the financial Bible of Nigeria. And if you like the Quran, the Constitution is the financial Quran of Nigeria, or any other book you're interested in. This is the document that gives life to the economy. And for now, the economy is quite dead because of the Constitution. So others have said, and I repeat it, that our economy is like a Boeing 747 or some huge aircraft that is running on the engine of on the engine of one of those lorries from the forest. You know, a big gilodo, those slow-moving lorries that carry wood. You know that engine. You want to use it to power a Boeing 747. That's how our economy is because of this constitution. This constitution is the weak engine in the Nigerian economy and must be changed for this reason and not primarily for any other reason. If you sort this out and you remodel the way we generate wealth in Nigeria, we can settle the other issues about representation. There'll be less crime, there'll be less insecurity, there'll be less unrest. This unemployment problem I mentioned will be solved. This youth bulge that Africa has, which should be an asset in our hands, will be tapped into. People will settle down. And on top of that foundation, you can start building the other changes. You want to have better representation and ethnic stability, you get it. But please, those are not the most important things. Those are old school arguments. This is a new school argument. My name is Ayadene. On a good day, I'm a medical doctor and a public health specialist. But my specialty is actually health financing. And health financing as a part of the larger global pie of financing and the economies of countries, and how that plays out in each sector, including health, but not just restricted to health. At the end of the day, you can't separate these things into little neat baskets. Financing is financing. Once you get it right. I know your sectors start working together. So get in touch with me, follow me, share my posts, and I want to hear your comments. I want to read from you. What do you think? Enjoy the rest of your week until I come your way again with an even more interesting podcast.